Good morning, everybody. Merry Christmas. It's a little too early for that. No, it's not, I guess. My name is Brad. I'm one of the pastors here, and I want to, as I did, greet you this morning. Would you say that the pace of your life reflects the peace in your heart? The answer is yes. It always will. One of the wonderful things that has brought me so much peace this Christmas is Amazon.com. How about a round of applause for Amazon.com? Yeah. Now that is, unless you're a retailer with a bricks and mortar kind of store, you're not so happy for Amazon.com. I ordered something at 8 o'clock one morning this last week. It was at my door at 11 a.m. Amazon.com, that's great. It's just helping me a lot with peace these days. Yeah, it really is. This Christmas, we have decided to think through Christmas on our weekend gatherings through kind of a lens of hope. It's one of the aspects of Christmas. There's this trifecta that Paul speaks about: faith, hope, and love. Of course, he says the greatest of those are love, but next door to it are faith and hope. And we've been thinking through what that is. Last weekend, if you were here, we talked a little bit about where does hope come in a desire and a request for Jesus to heal these perishable bodies of ours. And we, reminiscent of the earliest days of the first church 2,000 years ago, we prayed for one another and asked Jesus whether he'd be willing to heal some of us. And then we have this group of faithful ladies who for the last couple of years have handcrafted these shawls or these cloaks, call them prayer shawls. And they're intended for us to take as a gift of love and grace and a symbol of Jesus' love for people who are suffering and hurting and in difficult places, and to wrap them around them like the love of Jesus would wrap around them and pray for them. Last weekend, 87 of those prayer shawls went out of this building and around the shoulders of people, whether that's happened already or will, and just a request that Jesus would meet them where they're at. And I think that's such a wonderful thing that happened. The stories have not yet been told of what exactly is going to happen, but that was all done because of hope. Hope that Jesus is interested, and hope that he's got something better, because that's the nature of hope, right? Hope is simply waiting for something better than what currently is. This series kind of springs from this verse from Hebrews chapter 11. The whole chapter is just a fantastic chapter of hope and faith together. And it starts off this way. Now, faith is being sure of what we hope for. So we hope for something more, something better, something different than what it is. So we hope for that, and we're certain of what we do not see. So hope doesn't yet see it. But hope believes that it's there, and it's always better than what it is. N.T. Wright has written this wonderful book some years ago, I think it's 5-6 years ago, called Surprised by Hope. And it's a fascinating read. He's really looking more at what kind of hope do we have for life after this life here. But he starts his book off by asking these two questions, wonderful questions, thought-provoking questions. First question is, what are you waiting for? That's hope. Whatever you're waiting for is hope. Then he asks the second question, what are you going to do while you're waiting for that? That's faith. So faith is action. Faith is doing and moving and responding to the hope that we have. And so we've been thinking about hope. Hope is the kind of thing that says this won't last forever. But by the way, did you know that hope only shows up when things are rough? It's not actually hope when things are great. It's something else. Hope shows up when it's not so great. And so hope says there's a better day coming. Hope says, I think I can make it through this. I think the sun's going to rise. I think I can hang on till this lightens up. I can imagine a day when. That's hope. And we are hopelessly hopers. I remember 40 or so years ago, I was sitting in an open-air football stadium, and an internationally known religious teacher was teaching. And I don't recall the subject matter that he was speaking on. It must have been hope or something to do with this, because along the way, he made this statement, and I haven't been able to wash it from my mind. I don't want to wash it from my mind, but I was in that place as a late teen, kind of thinking through my own identity and who I am and what's true and is God real and, where's my hope? like so to speak. And he made this comment along the way. He says, without hope, you die. And I think what he was driving at is just how critical hope is for all of us, because if we don't actually think there's a better day, if we don't think the sun will rise, if we don't think that it could just be better down the road, we make kind of lifestyle choices and decisions, and kind of some of us get to the place where hope is completely leaked out. And then we end our lives. Hope is vital for us. It's critical. But why is it that hope seems so fragile? It seems to be with us one day, and then the next day we wake up and it just doesn't look as hopeful. Or the other way around, after a good night's sleep, it looks a little better in the morning. Like, hope seems so fragile. Well, it could be because not all hope is the same. This is just from my personal experience. I think there may be at least two, maybe more, but there are two kinds of hope. And I think one of those kinds of hope is what I call situational hope. And another is sustainable hope. And I don't know about you, but I'd like sustainable hope. Perpetual, ongoing, maybe even growing hope. So let me take just a minute and try to describe these two. Situational hope, first of all. Situational hope is just simply this. It's based on the circumstances of the moment and how I interpret them. And they may not all be that great, but I think it could get better. And my response to the situation is either going to be a strong and vibrant hope, or it's going to be an elusive and vanishing kind of fragile hope, and maybe someplace in between. But it's just not all that predictable how the situation is going to actually develop or whether it's going to have hope. So it's kind of fickle and it's unsustainable, this kind of hope. And here's why. Because we have to deal with personal disappointment that we've contributed to it, and because we're so imperfect. So, for example, when we have good health, because we've taken care of our bodies, and we have sufficient wealth because we have saved appropriately. We have life-giving relationships. We have a happy home life. We have invigorating career with people that we like. We have good grades, and the Cardinals win a game like 1 per year. Like, we're filled with hope. Hope abounds, right? And then my body begins to fail because I didn't really take care of it all that well, I guess. And I think I might have married the wrong person. And for sure, I picked the wrong major and the wrong career path. And good times seemed more expedient than good grades. And of course, the Cardinals have another losing season because I bought season tickets after that one win the previous year. And I just, like, hope is gone. And it's all based on the circumstances. It's all around that. Situational hope is also fickle and unstable and unsustainable. Well, because of unexplainable, unwanted situations or circumstances where we haven't maybe necessarily been involved. They just come our way. Like, for example, that great job offer that just comes out of the blue. Or running into him or her and I think I'm in love. The great deal on the home in the perfect neighborhood. It's not fatal, it's just a head cold. Junior gets into Harvard. And hope abounds. We did nothing for those things. It's just like good luck that came our way, and hope abounds. And then we get the diagnosis. You get a call from the president who wants to talk to you Friday afternoon before you go home from work. You get 6 rejection letters from your top 6 choices of school. Your health-challenged parent needs to move in with you. And the AC breaks right on the heels of the water leak. Unexpected, unwanted circumstances, and hope takes a direct hit, and hope is depleted and leaks away. You see, situational hope is fickle, it's unsustainable, and it's really fragile. But why is that? Why do circumstances have such a profound effect on our hope level? Well, one reason is we're not actually all that good at accurately self-evaluating and correctly interpreting those circumstances. We come to conclusions way too soon. And that's just us. Because we want outcomes and we want answers and we want to bring that hope-depleted situation to an end, or we want to perpetuate, and we just interpret circumstances inaccurately sometimes. Let me give you an example. This is how my kids would have evaluated circumstances that they might not have evaluated correctly. When our children were small, we were the kind of parents who took their kids to the dentist. Good parenting, right? Not if you ask my kids. They thought that was terrible parenting. Their perspective of it was this: my mom brought me to this place where she invited me into this chair, looked normal, and suddenly it just started to tilt back. And I didn't know what it was going to happen, and it felt really scary to me. And then this lady came in with this mask over her face and goggles over her eyes, and one of them had like an R2-D2 like lens thing sticking out the front of it that was so spooky for me. And of all things, she had rubber gloves, and nothing good ever happens when you come in with rubber gloves, not even as a male in your late. Then she took some sharp instruments out of plastic bags. She held them in such a way that I was certain she was going to like stick something into my face somehow. And then it just got worse. She did that. She stuck these like sharp instruments into my mouth, and it hurt. And one of those things she stuck into my mouth and the cheek and my gums was a needle. And then of all things, over the next few minutes, my mouth went completely numb. What parent does that to a child, right? And all my mom did is say, hey, be good, like it'll be over in just a little bit, and she left. And if that wasn't like bad enough and the kids were scared already, there's this giant sucking machine that she kept putting into kids' mouth. It was horrible and it was scary, and my parents are terrible parents. They were terrible parents. What did I do to deserve this kind of treatment? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with my parents? Are my parents good? No. Do they love me? No, I think not. And yet, now my kids do that to their kids. That's what they do. And they keep telling Elfie and me we're the best parents ever. Or we keep telling them to tell us that. I'm not sure which one that is. In the short term, our decision did create some pain. But that's all they saw in that moment was the hopelessness that what is this? But mom and dad knew better. The dentist knew better. We knew that this was good for the long term. But in that moment, hopeless. You see, we're not all that different from our children. Our circumstances are a little different, and it's not the dentist. It's stuff that happens to us, and we're just, frankly, we're not all that good in the moment of understanding exactly what the circumstances are. There's a second reason why hope of this kind, this situational hope, is so fragile. We are by nature impatient, and we want solutions to hope-depleting circumstances on a much shorter time frame than may be reasonable or actually even helpful for us. I could take you back 4,000 years if you want a biblical example. God comes to Abram and Sarah, and he says, I'm going to bless the whole world through you. That's what I'm going to do. And the way that we're going to do this is, you're geriatrics, I know, but you're going to be parents. You're going to have a baby. Now, the problem, God did everything right in Abraham and Sarah's lives, except this: he didn't kind of tell them how soon that was going to happen. And so you could imagine the first couple of weeks, right? There's like a frenzy, and they're hopeful. And, the little label on the thing doesn't turn the right color, and nothing happens. And then a month goes by, a year goes by, and 2 years go by. And I can just imagine the conversation between Abraham and Sarah, and Abraham going like, do you think we heard that right? Like, maybe it was just a metaphor for something. Maybe it wasn't really an angel. Sarah, I think we might want to take matters into our own hands. Like, let's hope that God's going to bless everybody through us, and it involves a child. And he said, like, children as many as the stars in the sky and sand on the sea. So why don't we just take this into our own hands? Because if Abram is honest, he says, I'm just impatient with God. I just want this to happen sooner than what God might want. And so the impatience leads one to lose a little bit of hope and a little bit of hope depletion, because we're still enough hope to try to take matters into our own hands. That's situational hope. And it's fragile, and it doesn't sustain in us. And there's a different kind of hope available to us. It's the kind of hope that God, I think, thinks about. When he uses the word hope, over and over again, you get this sense that it's a transcendent kind of hope. That yes, circumstances are involved. He understands the frailty of us as human beings, that we're so susceptible to that. And yet he comes along in some of the darkest circumstances when hope is like virtually gone. And he says, have hope. And there's a reason why he says he has hope. We can have hope. It's a growing, sustainable hope. What does that look like? Well, let me take you to the Christmas story that we celebrate. And I would like to try to paint a bit of a background, a context of what's going on in the world when God brings hope into the world. So if you were to go back a couple of thousand years, maybe a little less than that, someplace around 4 BC, it's the eastern front of the Roman Empire in a region called Palestine. It's an area that's been in firm Roman control for some 60 years. In the last 40 years, it's been under control by a Roman vassal king called Herod the Great. Now, there's conflict within historians as to what exactly happened in and around 4 BC to 4 to 6 AD, BCE. And that makes sense. And so the reason it makes sense is because we all tell history from different perspectives. There's a Roman historical account that's a little different. There's a Jewish historical account. And so some of these parts of the context, they're not verified across the board. So to take what I say with a bit of a grain of salt, it's kind of a compilation of the historical records that are there, though they vary in some ways. But whatever the specifics were, it was a very dark time. As I said, Herod the Great was in charge of this particular part of the Roman Empire, but he really was more concerned about pleasing Caesar than he was with serving his own people. And so he taxed them like crazy, burdensome taxes on them, because he had these grand building projects that he wanted to do, some of them to his own honor, but most of them actually to Caesar's honor. That's who he wanted to appease and make sure, because Caesar was the one that controlled whether he would stay in power or not. He was a paranoid guy. He had a couple of his sons killed because he thought they were scheming to take his throne away from him. He surveilled people all the time. He had this kind of hidden, covert group of people that would surveil to just keep an eye on things, that things would be stable. But one of the things that frustrated the Jewish folks more, like the taxing was bad, like horrendous actually, was that Herod the Great kept putting up symbols and dedicating buildings to Caesar's honor rather than to God's honor. These symbols that he would put up were symbols of like the Roman Empire. And if you know the Jewish perspective of Yahweh, you didn't even say his name. Never mind put up any symbols. And another thing that frustrated the Jewish people was the high priest role was something that God granted. And Herod just took that over, and he appointed the high priest. This is the top religious leader. So can you see the growing frustration that happens? Well, toward the end of Herod's life, around 4 BC, which is right around the years that Jesus comes into this world, Herod is close to death. He's on his deathbed, and a faction of rebellious Jews saw this as their opportunity to kind of take over things. And so they gathered in Jerusalem in the temple court area, and a couple of scholars were teaching and telling them about Jewish nationalism and what God wanted to do, and it kind of fomented a bit of an uprising in the temple courts. And a couple of the people that were there as part of it climbed the temple wall around it, and Herod had put up a giant eagle symbol, gold symbol of an eagle on the gate of the temple. And that was just horrid for these Jewish people to deal with. And so they scaled the wall and they started chopping it down. Well, Herod hears about it and he sends his army over to stop it. They intervene and they grab these guys that are doing it, and not much of a trial. These couple of guys and 40 that were with them were all burned alive because of that. That's Herod. That's his story. Herod dies. His son Archelaus comes to power, and he's not much better than his dad. And following this incident with the eagle, there's the Passover festival, and the city is now bustling with people from all over the country. And Archelaus is kind of concerned because there's uprising and there's rumblings and it's uncertain. And so he sends all of his troops to the temple courtyard area to suppress what's going on there. In the end, these rebels in the temple court throw rocks at his soldiers, and they respond appropriately, and 3,000 people are massacred. And they disperse to the hills. Well, that catches Rome's attention. They send a general named Vargas to come and to suppress this whole thing. And he brings 2 legions of elite Roman soldiers into Jerusalem. And on the way through, he stops at a little town called Sepphoris, about 4 miles from Nazareth. Do you know where Nazareth is? You know who lived there? Jesus' family lived there. And there's a bit of an uprising in Sepphoris, and he suppresses that and marches down to Israel. And between Sepphoris, or to Jerusalem, between Sepphoris and Jerusalem, 2,000 people are crucified. This is the culture. Hopeless, dark, bleak. And into it, God says, I am going to invade with a hope you cannot measure. You cannot maybe understand, but it will be sustainable hope. Even if those circumstances don't change, and in time they will change. But in this moment, they may not. This is how we're told about it. Through a young man named Joseph who has an encounter with an angel. In Matthew 1, we read, as he, that's Joseph, considered this. That's the visit from the angel. An angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream. Joseph, son of David, the angel said, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child within her was conceived by the Holy Spirit. And she'll have a son, and you'll name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. All of this occurred to fulfill the Lord's message through the prophet, an ancient message, a repeat of something 750 years old. Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. And therein lies the clue of what sustainable hope is. God does not just from the distance go, settle down, it's going to be okay, just keep hoping in me, this whole turmoil will pass, and I've got Herod the Great under control, and Archelaus, I've got him, and Caesar in Rome, don't worry about it, just keep going, have hope, be like, I've got this. He doesn't say that. Instead, the clue to sustainable hope is that he comes into the situation. He's part of the situation. His presence changes everything, if not the circumstances immediately. It changes everything. Because of his presence. Let me try to explain it this way. When I was a little boy, about 7 or 8 years old, I had an encounter with the boogeyman. Do you know the boogeyman? He's an international figure. They have him all over the world, apparently. And I had my own personal run-in with him. What happened is my friends and I had been telling kind of scary stories one afternoon after school, and we were trying to out-scare each other. Right? Who can tell the grossest story? Well, the boogeyman came up in this context, and one of the guys in my little circle told me about a personal experience that a friend of his had with the boogeyman. And apparently, what happened is the boogeyman lives under people's beds. Who knew? I wasn't aware of that till that point. And this guy's friend was lying in bed sleeping, and his arm fell over the side of his bed. And the boogeyman came out and ripped his arm off. Terrible story, just graphic kind of story, right? Well, I go home, and after dinner and a little bit of time in the evening, I get ready for bed, get into bed. My dad prays with me, turns out the light, leaves my room, closes the door, and there I lie, stiff as a board. I am terrified that I've got a boogeyman under my bed, right? I pull the covers up right to my neck. I am lying in bed with my hands under my butt because I am not having my hands fall out of bed, right? I'm terrified. 7 or 8 years old, whatever I was, I'm just like, I'm in panic mode. Not much hope, right? All I could think about was there's a boogeyman under my bed and my arm falls off the side. I'm done for. The longer I lay in my bed, the more terrified I became, and I began to think, I have to get out of this situation somehow. Like, how do I get out of here? How do I get out of bed? If I could just run to my dad, everything would be okay. And yet if I put my foot on the floor, I think he might be after feet, not just arms. And I'll never get out of here. I'll rip my leg off. It seems for hours that I lay there in terror. I don't know if it was that long. Situational hopelessness though, right? I heard my parents get ready for bed in the room across from me. And I thought if I could just get to my dad, if I can just get to my dad, he will protect me. I know he will. Well, a few more minutes. And I came up with a really, really risky plan. But I'm desperate. And my plan is this: if I can stand at the very back of my bed up against where the wall meets, and my little 7 or 8 year old legs can take like 3 or 4 quick steps, I can jump way, way beyond the edge of my bed, open the door, run to my parents' room, and I'll be safe. And so I do that. I slip out of front of the covers and I'm standing there, I'm shaking, but I got nothing to lose, right? And so I take my 3 or 4 steps and I jump as far as I can. I clear the edge of the bed, no boogeyman, open the door, run down the hall, open my parents' door, slam the door, jump into bed with them. I'm safe. I'm with my parents. It's all going to be okay. I explained to my parents what had happened and why I was so frightened. They consoled me. And my dad clearly informed me, Bradley, because that's what he called me, there's no such thing as a boogeyman. You don't have to be afraid. It's all right. Now, go back to your room. It's going to be all right. And I said, I want to sleep with you tonight. And my parents had this rule that children didn't sleep with mom and dad. And so I really was out of options. And so as terrified as I was, I walked back to my room, got to the door of my room, and I thought, how am I going to get back into bed? I figured it out quickly. I said, if I could run and jump, I could run and jump again. So I took a run at my bed, dove into bed, made it. It didn't get me. Made it. Pulled the covers back up underneath me, put my hands under my butt, and there I lay again. Just as afraid before. My dad's words, there's no such boogeyman, didn't help. It wasn't all that comforting. I still was pretty hopeless. I was going to live through the night. So I figured if it worked once, it's got to work again. I ran off the edge of my bed, took a quick jump down the hall, opened the door, dived into my parents' bed. And we went through this whole thing again. My dad reminded me that there was nothing to be afraid of and there's no such thing as a boogeyman, and he realized that is not helping. And then he said something to me that changed everything. He looked at me and he said, what if I take you back to your bed and I stay with you tonight? And I said, yeah, I think that's far better than sleeping with you and mom. And so he took me back to my bedroom. And strangely, I wasn't afraid to walk up to the bed and crawl in because my dad was there. And he would just take care of this situation. He would protect me. He would watch over me. My hope started to go up significantly, but it was a different kind of hope. You see, here's the difference for me. My dad didn't just give me hope. He was hope. And that's different than a little bit of advice and some good counsel and some affirming words. But when you have hope right with you, you actually don't need those words because hope is with you. My dad didn't give me hope. He was hope. But you see, you would have to take my word at that because you don't know my dad. You don't know why he was hope, but I do. You see, when I was a kid, my dad was, and I will tell you he still is, the bravest, strongest, biggest man I know. He's quiet, he's gentle, he's patient. He never complains, in spite of having Parkinson's for over 30 years now. I've never heard him complain, though the discomfort and pain is very real for him. When I was a kid, my dad stood barely 5'8" and maybe 150 pounds soaking wet. But I thought my dad could do anything that he wanted to do. My dad owned a gas station and a repair shop, and he worked harder and longer than any of my other friends' dads did. And when we played this game, my dad's bigger than your dad, I really believe my dad was bigger than their dad. We lived in a community where everyone came from the same ethnic background and kind of kept to themselves as a rural kind of community, but not my dad. He served the rural community that we lived in selflessly. On more than one occasion, I would hear a knock on the front door of our home, well past my bedtime, maybe well past midnight. I would hear my dad get up, get dressed, walk to the door, and he would leave, and it would be to go fill someone's tank with gas or to repair a tire, and he never ever charged for that. That was just my dad. When I was in elementary school, I saw my dad working at the dining room table where I was doing my elementary school homework, and he was doing homework. He was studying science and math because he really wanted to get his GED. It's my dad. My dad let me work alongside him every Saturday morning in his garage, and my job was to wipe the oil and grime off the wrenches and his other tools and to sweep the floor and clean up around the garage. And then Saturday morning, or Saturday afternoon, evening, we would, after dinner, we'd be together as a family, and the treat every Saturday for my work for him in the morning was he would bring a soda and a candy bar. And that was the gift at the end of Saturday nights. My dad also sold farm equipment for a few years, and often when he would sell a new piece of equipment, he would take used equipment in trade for that new equipment. One time he took in trade a 14-year-old Shetland pony. The best day of my life and the worst day of my life. Another time, this was the best thing ever, he took a go-kart in trade for a tractor that he had sold. And I can't remember, 8, 9, 10 years old or so. He helped me fire it up, and on I went. No helmet, nothing, just cruising down the gravel road. I decided to take it up on the paved county freeway, like highway. I think I got it up to like 60 miles an hour. It was fantastic. It's the last time I drove that go-kart. One day, my dog Ringo got in trouble with a neighbor who was a farmer next to us, and this neighbor decided to, because he thought he had chased his cattle, he decided to shoot Ringo. And when my dad found that out, I remember driving over with him to this man's business. And he said 4 words to me, "Stay in the truck." And he went in, and I just knew he was advocating because of how horrible I felt about losing my dog. My dad never raised his voice at me, except one time. And that was when we were kind of messing around and wrestling, and he was done, and he said, "Let's stop." And I didn't stop, and I slammed his fingers in the door. And he raised his, it's the only time I can ever remember my dad raising his voice. My dad was, and still is, absolutely amazing. He's a leader. He's kind. He has impeccable integrity. Selflessly compassionate with other people. He's generous. He's loyal. He's faithful. He's smart. He's courageous. He's strong. And he reminds me so much in so many ways of what I think Jesus was like. Now, the reason I tell you all about my dad is that I want you to know who it was that came and lay down with me and why he was more than offering hope. He was hope because he was so great and he's so good and strong and powerful and able and capable, and he loved me. He was going to protect me as he could. That's my dad. That's who lay down with me. You see, he wasn't offering hope. He was hope. Sustainable hope for you and I is not God calling from a distance. Don't be afraid. He does that over and over again. I just did a little quick search this morning. 26 times is what I found. There are many more, but 26 times. And 26 out of 26 times, you know why he says don't be afraid? Don't be hopeless? Because I'm with you. That is sustainable hope. And so when God comes in a form of an angel to a young man and a young woman, and he's going to bring a baby into the world, he says, you're going to have Emmanuel, God with you. I'm bringing hope into the world, not just encouraging you to have hope in your circumstances. I'm present. And because I'm present, you have hope. But who is it? Who is this Jesus that comes and lies in our bed with us, so to speak? I love what Paul, one of the writers, the major writers of the New Testament, writes. He does this 2 or 3 times where he's writing on one subject matter and suddenly he just riffs on something. It's like something grabbed his attention and his emotions and his thoughts just go off this way. You know what more times than not it is? Almost every time. He's describing who Jesus is to him. I think Paul, in his hopelessness on the way to Damascus, discovered that hope was not something that he could aspire to, but someone who would be with him. And he's so moved by who it is that's with him. He writes things like this in Colossians 1. He says, this is who hope is. Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created. And he is supreme over all creation. For through him, God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things we can see and the things we can't see. Things like thrones and kingdoms, rulers, and authorities in the unseen world. Everything was created through him. Everything. And for him. He existed before anything else, and buckle up for this one. He holds all creation together. In this moment, we're in great shape as a planet. Not because we don't have problems, not because Washington isn't chaotic, not because there aren't dangerous shootings and evil people around and climate change and all of the stuff in our world. There is still someone in control. There's still somebody who holds it all together. Christ is also the head of the church, thank God, which is his body. He is the beginning, supreme over all who rise from the dead. So he is first over everything. For God in all of his fullness was pleased to live in Christ. And through him, God reconciled everything to himself. He made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of Christ's blood on the cross. And then he says this, and this includes you. That's us. That is hope in our world with us. Jesus is with us. And this is why he doesn't just say, have hope, don't be afraid, it's going to be okay. He will say that, but on the premise of, I'm here and I'm with you. This is a unique, sustainable hope found in the presence of Jesus. And for this Jesus, this season, this Christmas season, would we be more keenly aware that you are present with us. Some of us, even in this moment, face way depleted hope. There's stuff going on in our bodies, in our minds, in our families, in our marriages, in our circle of friends, in the places where we work and go to school, that just the thought of them in this moment depletes hope, because we don't know how it could get better and might it get better. But Jesus, turn our eyes to you who are present. May we know you. May we know increasingly the wonder of who you are. The sustainer, the perfecter, sovereign over everything, ever present, in charge of all things, loves like no one has ever loved, is merciful and gracious and kind and good and integrous and honorable and courageous and big and present. And we have hope with you because you are hope with us, Jesus. Thank you.